So we're going to talk about the back squat. First, let me introduce to you my athlete, Maria Rodenberg. She is the daughter of John Rodenberg, legendary Moeller coach. So we're happy to use her today and thankful that she can come out here and help us. We're going to be talking about the back squat, and I love the back squat, and I'm happy to be able to talk about the back squat because of how much of a technical lift it is and how much it seems to be the centerpiece of most people's programs. What's really unique about the back squat and any spinal loading pattern is we have an opportunity to train the body on how to resist compression forces. What's particularly hard about a compression force via spinal loading is that we're placing a load directly on the vertebral column. What that means is I'm placing load really directly on this nervous system that is helping me feel and move my way throughout the environment. It's a very delicate structure, and you see a lot of injuries, particularly in athletic populations. You see a lot in high school athletics. You see a lot of spondies, spondylolisthesis, lower back fractures. But any kind of injury you get to your central nervous system or your peripheral nervous system, you're not going to just bounce right back from. You're going to be out for a little bit of time. And neurons that wire together fire together, and I don't want to ingrain poor mechanics under compressional load. So what I mean by compressional load, just a little bit of physics and a little bit of Thomas Myers lingo right here, is this compressional force is coming down and my body resists that by resisting it via tension. It distributes it over tension, and what we know via spinal loading, where we do most of that, is here at the core around the pelvis and the thoracic area, the thoraco-pelvic canister, so to speak, and we need to make sure that we're being safe more than anything. Common faults that you see are hinges that shouldn't be there in the vertebral column, right? When we're under compressional load, we want the spine to move as one unit. Really, at any point, we want the spine to move as one unit. And you see a lot of compensated postures where people are creating hinges that shouldn't be there. Those hinges then move locally, and because of that, we're not distributing that tension over a large area. We're distributing that tension, or that compression, locally, taking that on at one facet joint, and that facet joint right there is just basically a door that gets slammed open and open and open again. That's why you see guys wear down those vertebral columns. That's why you see those lower back fractures, and we're going to make sure we avoid that today. Now, the first thing you do before you put a compression force on anybody is you screen them. You can use the FMS. If you have someone who has a history of shoulder injuries, it's particularly useful to put them on the wall and test for their shoulder range of motion. I like to do that by placing an athlete against the wall, making sure you retain your 3 points of contact, putting your arms up and taking yourself through external rotation, making sure that you have the capacity to do so without really flaring your ribs or extending your thoraco-lumbar joint right there. So it's important to make sure that people have the shoulder range of motion to do so. I've seen people dislocate their shoulders back squatting, and that's not a legit enough excuse to get hurt in the shoulder. So we're making sure that we're screening for that. Also, if you have someone who's lacking ankle range of motion, which you should have identified on an FMS, if you use the FMS, we want to make sure that we're taking care of that pre-putting a bar on their back, because they're going to compensate under load, guaranteed every time. What you can do as another progression, if you're missing the ankle range of motion, you can put the heels up on a platform, but I would suggest doing that not under much load, not under compression load, maybe in a goblet variation or something like that. So I need to screen them and make sure that they're able to do the movement and to see what kind of movements happen during that movement. If I have someone who's moving very fluently at local hinges that shouldn't be there, I need to make sure that they understand what that means and how to correct that via different cues. So you can see right here, Maria, if I have you stand facing this way, because Maria is an athlete and because a lot of athletes are coached into this position, we have a little bit of anterior pelvic tilt right here, which in Thomas Myers lingo means that her superficial back line right here, or the backside, tends to function this way, and that your superficial front line tends to function this way right here. So because we have these opposing forces like this, it's driving the pelvis forward right here, and it's going to shorten the spinal erectors. Very, very common pattern. I just got to be very careful on that in the setup and make sure that I'm training the athlete to know what the difference is between having that anterior pelvic tilt and being in a neutral spine position, because if I have a local facet joint moving, it's going to really exacerbate the problem while we have load on it. Also, we have a little bit of forward head on neck, which is common in every population. Again, it's really a counterbalance measurement because as I bring that pelvis forward, maybe my knees hyperextend a little bit, the head comes forward as a counterbalance measure. Also, the head is connected down to the superficial front line at the back of the head right here. So if my superficial front line's operating down, and my back line's operating up, it's going to drag the back part of the head down and create that forward head on neck position. So what we're going to do is cue that when she gets up under the bar. Now, Maria, I'll go ahead and have you demonstrate just a normal squat for us. And we're going to get an idea of how she's moving right here while she has a bar on her back. Awesome. And one more rep, please. Excellent. Thank you very much. So you can see right there, we have a little bit of that extension bias as we come back. Now, it's okay to get a little bit of anterior pelvic toe as we come down. And if that head moves a little bit up right here, that's all good as long as the spine's moving in one unit, like so. Right? One of the correctives for seated posture is you actually roll around on the pelvis and have that pelvis drive the head movement and neck movement to make sure that the spine is functioning as one unit. Right there you see a slight bit of hyperextension at the thoracolumbar junction right there. Also at the cervical junction right here you see a little bit of hyperextension, and at the bottom you see the reversal because we run out of range of motion on the hamstrings where the pelvis goes from an anterior tilt to a posterior tilt right there at the bottom. Again, not necessarily the biggest deal in the world right here. It's probably not going to hurt her. In younger populations, you might be a little bit more worried about that, but you're going to see a loss of stability at the hip under extreme load, so you might see that knee come in. You might see the foot position pronate a little bit, which is going to put a lot of pressure on the anterior medial knee. So you got to be careful when coaching this because, remember, we're ingraining a movement pattern, and we're ingraining a movement pattern under compression load, so we got to be careful. Maria, I'll have you squat this time. When we come out of the rack right here, we unrack, we stand and try to get as tall as possible. Then we're going to think about drawing this pubic bone up towards the ribs. By doing so, we activate our pelvic floor and our diaphragm and give ourselves the opportunity to control this area right here. Your pelvic floor is really your second diaphragm, and breathing can actually help create a lot of intra-abdominal pressure right there. So what we know is if these two things are out of whack, I'm losing also control of my autonomic nervous system in that particular area right here because we're starting to put a lot of compression load at one junction that my autonomic nervous system can't handle. It's really cutting off access to my parasympathetic nervous system, which is housed down here, innervated down here. So for her, we're going to have her get nice and long. We're pulling up that pubic bone towards the ribs, and we're going to go ahead and squat nice and slow, trying to control this movement. There we go, well done. And one more. Well done, awesome, awesome. So it's a little bit weird, but we're training control right here of this compressional movement. We're training it nice and slow. Oftentimes, just slowing it down and focusing on the eccentric phase will ingrain that movement, and then we can pick it back up after we feel more comfortable with it. So again, it's really important to consider the way that the athlete presents themselves in their posture and the way that they're going to move. If I want an external cue on this, at Athletes Performance, we always said, cut off the flow, or imagine someone's walking up behind you while you're peeing in the woods, and it helps kick on the pelvic floor. So if you want an external cue to use right there, a little bit more imagery, sometimes that can be a little bit more effective. But ultimately, whenever I'm using a compressional force or teaching an athlete how to move under compressional forces, I need to take into account their personalized options right there and make sure that I'm appealing to every athlete's differences. Because if I have someone who is more of a flexor that likes to load into their knees, I want them to get nice and long and actually relax their hips and sit back into them. So just depends on what the person needs. Right here, we had an anterior pelvic tilt. That's going to be the most common in athletic populations. And I hope you learned something. Thank you very much.